Requests for redress and protests. All right. As I said before, some people have got the idea that if someone only contacts me, therefore I'm entitled to redress. Not on. The other problem we have with our protest system, and it's a system we got that we have to... There is a good percentage of the skippers, even experienced skippers, don't understand the rule really well enough to be on a protest committee. They do the best they can. Whatever the outcome, just shake hands, get on with the sailing. You know, that's a decision. You couldn't fix it on the water. They did the best they could to get a fair outcome. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, shake hands and get on with it. And leave that, don't say another word about that incident at the regatta. Protests and requests for redresses to be conducted in accordance with the racing rules, sailing part 5. Recommendation for protest committees are contained in Annex M, and there's a copy of that in your thing. That actually gives you the sequence you should follow to do a protest. The skipper's got 10 minutes from the end of a heat to inform the RO that he intends to protest, and the RO gives him a protest form, writes the times on the top. There is a slight adjustment in heat racing, because if you said 10 minutes, that means that the next race couldn't start for 10 minutes. And over a couple of days, that extend out to a thing. So what they've done there, they've amended to 10 minutes, or in fleet racing, prior to the preparatory signal of the next race. If it comes in after the preparatory signal, just don't go ahead with it, because if it comes in after the preparatory signal, or the boats are racing, that means you've got to call the boats off the water because you don't know if you've got the right boats in the heat. Every effort should be made to resolve all disputes on the water. Protests take time, especially in fleet racing. If the matter cannot be resolved by the competitors, the RO may have to nominate an arbitrator, and if they don't nominate an arbitrator, he is to do it in accordance. If you went to the sailing instruction, there's a thing in the back of the sailing instruction with guidelines for the arbitrator, what he can and can't do. People get confused with that too. There's only one score that the arbitrator can give. It's a penalty score halfway between where you finished and the disqualification. Right? He can't say, even if it was on the last leg of the course, he can't say, oh, we're going to give you 3 points. All right? The only points he can give you is halfway between things. The arbitrator too, in fleet racing, can't handle redress. If the situation calls for redress, it must be a protest committee. So you've got to call the protest committee. Who may request redress? A boat may request. A race committee, the race committee, if it thinks it's made a mistake, can ask for redress to be considered. It can't give you redress. The RO can't give you redress, but it can form a protest committee to consider redress. The protest committee, now it can, even if you didn't ask for it, as part of its decision, it can award you redress if it thinks it's necessary or it's warranted. Technical committee, I've never seen the technical committee give redress. Who can grant redress? Only a protest committee may give redress. An arbitrator does not have the authority to give redress. The RO has no power to give redress without a hearing. Now, I've seen a lot of cases where blokes come up to the RO and ask for redress, and the RO said, oh yeah, I think that's fair enough, I'll give you, you're opening yourself up. One of the other skippers can come and then request redress because his position was made worse because of your actions. And that is an improper action because it tells you can't do it. When it's protest or redress, you've got to determine if an arbitrator or protest committee is required. Now, as I said, most cases people are looking for redress. If it's involving redress, it's got to go straight to a protest committee. Our HMS, our PRYC arbitration, we allow the arbitrator to give redress. We allow them to give redress provided the other boat has done a penalty and has committed admitted liability for the offence. But that's just to keep things going. All right.
Bill, who would the arbitrator be?
Whoever you choose, whoever the RO chooses. Same as a protest committee, whoever you choose. Now, normally you have a look at the people sailing, you can pick out a couple of blokes that have got a fair knowledge of the rules, he'll be the arbitrator. What you've got to do, but being on a protest committee or an arbitrator really throws you off your game. All right, so don't expect the same bloke to do all the protests or all the arbitration. Try and spread it out amongst the more experienced skippers. You can, in single fleet racing, you can determine whether the protest or redress has to be heard immediately. In single fleet racing, you can normally put it off. In fleet racing, it determines how many fleets you got. All right, but it has to be heard before that boat, if he gets disqualified, has to sail again. So if there's 2 heats, you're in big trouble. But if it happened in a fleet, you still have trouble if he's got a chance of being promoted, if he was on the last leg of the course. So you've just got to think around that. It does, protests and arbitration do take time, and it's the biggest complaint we have with the HMS system, that it does take time. You've got to select the arbitrator or protest, advise the scorers of the outcome of the hearing. It's no use having a hearing and not advising the scorers what the outcome is. What is a good practice, especially if people get redress, for the RO at regular intervals to go up to the scorer and say, what have you got for boat so-and-so in race 3? All right? And if they give you a score, you say, well, you know, he got redress in that race. And that's happened to me before. That we were talking before about the RO protesting. The RO should refrain from protesting when there's boat on boat. That should be left up to the skippers. All right? The RO should only protest if he believes the defending boat has gained an unfair advantage or on a significant number of competitors. There is a great infringement of rule or contact call by the RO observers has not been resolved. Now, there is a proviso on that. If you haven't got confirmation, you know, it's pointless calling a protest, all right, because it's just going to get thrown out. When looking at it, you should consider, was a valid protest made at the time of the incident? If a valid protest was not made at the time of the incident, except for which rule? If the bloke didn't sail the course, he sailed under a mark, you don't have to do it. But was a valid protest made at the time of the incident? When that goes to protest, all right, one of the first parts of the protest hearing is to determine if it's a valid protest. That includes things like, was a protest called at the time? Were you in the control area, etc. They determine that it's a valid protest and they go on. If they determine it's not a valid protest, the matter is closed. Even if he's as guilty as sin, the matter is closed because there was no protest called at the time of the incident. Or the bloke who was protesting wasn't in the control area at the time of the incident. Was a penalty taken as soon as possible? And this comes back to what we were talking about before. The penalty is to be taken as soon as possible, not when is convenient. If a penalty is not done properly, the penalty is not done. You haven't complied with the requirements. Did the offending boat gain a significant advantage because of the breach? Was any damage done in the incident? If a boat is given redress because she was damaged, her redress shall include reasonable time but not more than 30 minutes to make repairs before her heat. This can be a problem in single fleet racing because you can wind up having long delays between each heat if people are getting damaged. But he's entitled to up to 30 minutes to repair his boat. We have adjusted that for club racing. How have we adjusted that for club racing? It gives average points for races started within that 30 minutes. But that's only if he was the right-of-way boat, not if he was in the... It's the same as if the boat was damaged, all right, you withdrew from that race, all right. If he can't get started for the next race, that's not your problem. You've met the requirements of the rules by retiring from that race. You're allowed to sail in the next race. He can request redress if he wants to have redress for some reason. Just because he was damaged and can't sail for the rest of the day doesn't mean you can't sail for the rest of the day.
No, I'm talking about the damaged boat. Did the damaged boat get redress for the rest of the day? Now the boat that caused the damage,
Yep.
to take the other boat out, he's got to take himself.
He's got to retire for that race. But you have met the requirements of the rule by retiring from that race. You're allowed to sail in the next race. If the other bloke wants to claim redress or something, that's up to him to request it. Club racing, we've said instead of stopping for 30 minutes each time, we'll give them average points for the first 30 minutes. Rightio, the casebook, this is one of the most misunderstood rules. An advantage gained is to be measured relative to the whole fleet. A boat may take a one or more turn penalty, but better position than the boat she infringed, but in a worse position than she would have been if she hadn't broke the rule. In this case, she has completed her penalty. So when you have all these blokes saying, you've got to get back behind me, that rule does not cover the boat that was infringed. It's only covering the boat that gained the advantage. It'd be impossible. Can you imagine them saying, rightio, 6 boats here were disadvantaged, all right? And it's got to be the same 6 boats that's ahead of him. So we'll stop racing, you move up a bit, you come back, you are ahead of him, so all right, we're all right, let's go again. It's impossible. So what it is, say he's coming in and he's going to go around the mark, there's a train coming up. He comes in, smashes into him, goes around the mark, does a penalty and takes off, all right? These boats get tangled up. He takes off, he's gained an unfair advantage because they would consider that if he ducked the fleet and got in where he should have gone in, he would have been 8th. So the international judges will just say to you, another penalty, another penalty, another penalty, till he gets back to around the 8th position. That doesn't mean to say it's got to be the same boats. It's just relation to your position, relation to the fleet. All right, it's very misunderstood because people ring, and I've heard numerous times people say, you know, oh, you've got to be behind me, you infringe me, you've got to be behind me. And that's not the case.
Go as far as allowing someone to replace their damaged boat with another boat?
With everything but the DFs, no. We had an incident where one of the top skippers turned up with 4 DFs, all with a different rig on it. The rules clearly state that only one is to be used at an event, all right? Except in one hull, one keel, one rudder, and one set of each of the sails. With the DFs, they will allow, like up at Sunshine Coast, she burnt a hole in the side of a boat about that big, but they let her change boats. They said, yes, no problem, they're all the boats are the same, she can do that. But you can't have a bloke turn up with a different ring on each boat, so if the wind changes, all he does is swap boats. Also, you can't, I've had blokes come up and ask, could he swap his boat because his servo went? That's just general maintenance. That's repairable. It's only in cases of demonstrable damage. If the RO, and like we said, try and pick your times. Don't boat on boat, don't protest the boat on boat, leave that up to the skippers and stuff like that. Because what will happen is you'll get the thing that you got bias against some boats, or you think. Always prefix your protest with RO. All right? RO protest for, that's to cut out any of this thing that the skippers think it's another skipper protesting it. Protest by another boat, 5-6 protest 2-5, 5-6 protest 2-5, you will understand that. Taking a penalty. Like I said, just because you do a turn doesn't mean you have completed your penalty. If you haven't done it promptly, you have not met the requirements. All right? So there's 4 or 5 requirements. Get well clear of the boats. You must get well clear of the boats as soon after the incident as possible. So you can't go around the mark. Like if you're in between marks, on the top mark and that, I'd much prefer to see a bloke go around the mark than try and do his turn in front of everybody and pile everybody up. All right, so he goes around the mark, makes a turn in the same direction. So I've seen boats go one way and then come back the other way, not in the same direction, not counted. Each turn is to include 1 tack and 1 jibe. Now there is circumstances that won't be a 360. But if he completes a tack and the jibe, he has completed these. A penalty at or near the finish Her hull shall be completely on the course side of the line before finishing. Now, she can do the penalty anywhere. She can do the penalty on the far side of the course line. She can do the penalty going back around the buoy. She can do the penalty on the course side, but she's got to be back completely on the course side before finishing. When is a penalty not sufficient? There is times when a penalty turn is not sufficient. Can anyone give us one? Did not attempt the penalty as soon as possible. Did not complete the penalty turn. Caused damage, because if you cause damage, a penalty turn doesn't exonerate you because you've got to retire. If the other bloke retires. Gained a significant advantage. A penalty turn doesn't exonerate you if you've gained a significant advantage. And as we said, that is based on your position in the fleet, not on individual boats.
Well, what happens if two boats hook up together and the fleet sails past? The guy who was in the right, who's in perhaps an innocent party, what happens to him? What happens to the boat that infringes? He's got to
do a penalty. He does a penalty turn, and that clears him. Right. Once he's done a penalty turn, he can't be further punished. All right, unless the penalty turn is for a breach of Rule 2, which is a D&E, etc.
There's a port and starboard contact.
Yep.
Acknowledgement is made by the offending boat.
Yep.
He does his penalty, exonerates himself and sails on.
Yep.
The boat on the starboard tack was thrown into irons.
Yep.
And just gets the shits, let's say, and decides I'm retiring.
Yep.
Now surely...
That's a good example. The boat that retires won't get redressed.
Yes, but the other guy...
That doesn't matter. The boat that retired won't get redressed because why?
He stopped racing.
He stopped racing.
Yeah.
Therefore, his position in the thing was not through no fault of his own. He contributed to where he finished.
Thank you. Okay.
The other option with that is if you think you've been badly done by, you can request redress. Whether you get it or not is up to the committee. Once the other bloke has done his penalty, he's exonerated himself. If a boat loses radio control of his boat, he shall twice hail his boat sail number out of control. And from that moment on, he's considered obstruction and he must retire. All right, even if he yells boat out of control and then he gets his control back and sails on, he's not on. As soon as he yells out of control, he must retire. The bottom line is, if you're out of control, you've got to call it. That's warning the other boats that you're out of control. And then once you've called out of control, you've got to retire. Simple as that. Why you've got to retire is because those other boats who even had right of way over you may have taken avoiding action to help you out. Once you've yelled out of control, that's it. There's no going back. You've retired. If you're out of radio control, Dan should have said, I'm out of control. End of story. That's it. Go home. Scores that can be determined by the race officer. If a boat did not sail the course, finish, or comply with the rules, the U flag, the black foul, and funny enough, if he doesn't produce a certificate. All right, but that's beside the point. Don't worry about that one at the moment. That retires shall be scored according to the race committee without a hearing. Only a protest committee may take other scoring action which worsens a boat's score. And that goes back to what you were saying. Only a protest committee can take action which... I keep harping on it, there is no provision within the rules to protest a race committee. No provision whatsoever within the rules to protest a race. You can request redress, but it has to be based on an improper act or omission on the race committee. An improper act is defined as one that is not permitted by the rules. So if you're on the protest committee and they're claiming an improper act, if it is permitted by the rules for him to do it, whether 90% of the fleet thinks it was a bad decision, if it's permitted by the rules, it is not an improper act. If it's not an improper act, they can't get redress. Request by skippers to reopen a hearing. A request by a skipper to reopen a hearing must be based on an error by the committee in interpreting the rule, or new evidence that was not available at the time of the hearing becoming available. Now, new evidence, they've taken that as if a witness comes forward, that's not new evidence. You just failed your diligence before it's your responsibility to get that information before the meeting, all right? So, an error of the committee in interpreting it, or new evidence. The RO does not determine whether a protest will be reopened. The protest committee must determine whether they're going to be reopened. In case where it's an error by the committee, you usually have to have at least one new committee member. All right? Sometimes it's advisable to get more committee members. If it's based on new evidence, it's advisable to have the same committee as much as possible as originally heard the evidence. Otherwise, you're just going back through all the evidence again. New evidence has to be new evidence, not repeating what you said yesterday. It's got to be new evidence.
Can it be video evidence? Or?
I tried to get into the sailing instruction that video evidence for fleet racing will be not accepted. One of our favourites, conduct. The sailing is a self-policing sport, but the enforcement of Rule 2 and 69, which we never do in radio sailing because it's too complicated, is the responsibility of all. Competitors and race officials alike. Allowing unacceptable behaviour to go unchecked is the same as condoning it and does not protect the sailors who have chosen to compete within the rules. Promotion of fair play and sportsmanship is the responsibility of all involved in the sport, not only the officials, all that's involved in the sport. All races are to be conducted under the basic principle. All competitors are to abide by the principle of sportsmanship and fair play detailed in Para 26 of the Race Management Manual. ARYA QRYA supports competitive racing but does not condone abuse, bullying or harassment of other competitors or use of unsavoury language. And the reason for unsavoury language, you say, well, that's a bit childish. A lot of the places we sail are in public parks. Those people have the right to use the public park without having a heap of grumpy old men, but he going off their banana. The RO may reprimand an offending member or may offer the competitor a 2-turn on-the-spot penalty to avoid the protest hearing. However, the RO is not obliged to make this offer, nor the competitor obliged to accept it, in which case it'll go to protest. So you just call 720 protest, behaviour protest. That protest is not determining who was right or wrong. It doesn't stop the other bloke from protesting the other boat. That is all that's saying is your behaviour in handling is not acceptable. A lot of instances that happen at things really should be done with a Rule 69, but as Rule 69 becomes so complicated, especially at an event. The competitor is allowed to, the accused is allowed to get bloody legal advice if he wants to. It just becomes unmanageable at a ranking event. Although he has the right to legal counsel, he must answer all the questions himself. It must be given to him in writing beforehand. Who can protest under Rule 69? Only a protest committee can protest under Rule 69. You may bring a case to bring a complaint forward, but only a protest committee can decide whether it's going to go to a Rule 69. The one we usually deal with is a Rule 2. The burden of proof is balance of probability for most of it. A Rule 2, it's got to be clearly established, which is a higher degree. All right. What is the punishment under Rule 2? What punishment can a protest committee give under Rule 2?
Disqualification.
Disqualification that is not excludable. That's the only... The old rules that it gave him the choice of a disqualification or a disqualification not excludable. Under the current rules, if he's found guilty of a Rule 2, the only penalty he can give is a disqualification that's not excludable.
For that race?
For that race.
Not the event?
No, he can't. It's got to be for that race. A Rule 2, there's no DSQ, it's a disqualification not excludable.
Yeah, okay.
DNE.
It can, but
That's it.
in a HMS
fleet system, he would still come down a fleet
Certainly would.
as a consequence.
Yep, because it's not excludable, but that score would remain. He can't have it as a drop. And if it's a disqualification not excludable, that is the fleet plus one. So if you've got 80 boats, that's 80 plus one that you can't drop. So if you're one of the top 10 boats, they won't get that many points in the thing. Your race is over.
Isn't that in the heat only?
No, disqualification is fleet plus one. If you don't finish,
So the D&E carries for the whole
lot plus one.
All the way through.
And you can't drop it. And you can't drop it. You're buggered, you're going home. Your race is finished.